Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well. We're on a roller coaster today just to kind of keep us busy. Let's see. Thank you. I will enable the transcription, Rachel. Thank you. Just a quick announcement, just to remind you. Oh, here we go down the roller coaster. Okay. We don't have a discussion section tomorrow because of the Thanksgiving holiday. I hope everybody has a nice Thanksgiving. Any questions you folks have? We're just kind of trudging along here. As I said, we're putting all of our exam questions together for the last exam. I believe that, well, we have to talk about what the best review session time is for you folks, and then we'll firm up when the test can be taken, but we'll do that as soon as we get back, probably on Tuesday. Okay, let's see if there's any questions from you folks. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. If people are getting a little seasick from this roller coaster, let me know. I can switch it, but hopefully we'll be okay. All right, then let's go ahead and continue where we left off. Let me just get everything ready here. Cool. All right. So we are going to finish up our discussion of, oh, shoot. Hold on, nobody panic. Okay, all right. Anyway, okay. Yes, Saeed, it is okay that you go to your orthodontist in 30 minutes. No problem. Okay, we are recording, I assume. Yes, everything's recording. Good. All right. So just to remind us where we were discussing face perception, but more generally, we were discussing modules and the idea that there might be some functions in the brain that are specialized, specialized for a class of stimuli. And that's kind of the big picture that we've been addressing here. And, as we discussed, we wouldn't want every class of stimuli to have a specialization. We would want things that had a particular, evolutionary importance, or what I'm saying here is ecological relevance, right? But something like faces makes sense, right? We get so much information from faces. It's so important in how we relate to one another. And of course, we're a critical class of stimuli for each other when it comes to kind of, perceptual categories, right? Being able to perceive other people is absolutely critical to our survival. And then we discussed some other characteristics of modules, the anatomical and functional distinctiveness. And we did spend a lot of time on talking about, how potentially at least faces seem to be perceived using maybe a different class of processes from other things, including, being able to use configural or holistic. I think we use the term holistic information as well as featural information. And we talked about some of the other characteristics as well, that we're not aware of the process, unlike things like playing chess. There's a certain impenetrability, remember this term, there's a certain kind of protectedness of these processes. So even if we, know something, consciously about the stimuli, we can't help but perceive faces, and that's why we see, theoretically at least, why we see faces and things that we know are not faces, such as car fronts and mountain silhouettes and cheese sandwiches and things like that. That would be examples of cognitive impenetrability. So all those things seem to be true of face perception. One last characteristic that we haven't talked about yet, and I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about that now, is the idea that the module is going to take in all the relevant information that one might ever want to use with regard to the class of stimuli, in this case, face perception, and that that information can get in through just more than just one sense. It can get in through our eyes, obviously, but potentially it could get in through another sense as well. So this is what I meant by the multimodal aspect of modules. Modules take information from more than one sensory modality, as long as that other sensory modality can also get information about that class of stimuli. So the question is, can we perceive faces through other modalities? And there's evidence, more recent evidence, that that is in fact the case. So let's talk a little bit about this. There's a literature that emerged about 10 years ago showing that we can perceive faces through touch. And, you know, I don't know, maybe we've experienced this when, maybe in a romantic situation, and, with the lights off or something like that, we touch the face of our significant other, in a romantic gesture. Maybe when we were little, we might have touched the face of our parents in a dark situation or something like that. But I think what's been surprising is that we're able to perceive so much information through touch when it comes to faces. So yes, in fact, when it comes to touching live faces, we can do quite well, especially if they're, faces of people we know. So, in these experiments, we would either have family members or close friends that would be, willing to subject their face to being touched, usually with a rubber glove on and all that sort of stuff. Or in other experiments, people would be taught to recognize faces visually and then asked to recognize those faces through touch. They'd be able to do that as well. And these are, again, all with live faces, so they involve, the subject wearing a rubber glove, after learning to recognize the face visually, and then touching a series of faces and trying to determine which is the one they just saw. And these faces are all, relatively similar. It would be like all women's faces, or if it were all men's faces, there'd be, no facial hair or anything like that. It would be a demonstration of the ability to recognize faces through probably the shapes of the features, as well as kind of the holistic aspects of the face. When it comes to recognizing that the mouth is so far below the nose and the chin tip is so far below the mouth, that is something that can be done. Interestingly, so it is one example, and there's many examples of this now. In the same different task, so the subject would be asked to, determine whether two faces that are both of men about the same age, or both of women about the same age, same ethnicity, all that, and asking whether they are touching the same face twice, blindfolded, of course, or two different faces. They're really very good, 80%. And when it comes to matching faces that are felt, touched by the hand, to that ones that can be seen, they're about the same. Interestingly, now, we did talk a little bit about this issue with people that had brain damage, or some sort of brain issue where they aren't able to recognize faces through sight. Those same individuals who've been diagnosed with prosopagnosia, are also not great at touching faces or recognizing faces through touch. In fact, they're just as bad as, they have, very little skill in doing this. They would not be able to perform that matching task that those of us that don't have prosopagnosia can do. They would touch two faces that were either the same or different, and they would not be able to say whether they were the same or different, which is really interesting if you think about it, because we've always assumed that prosopagnosia has something to do with a difficulty with seeing faces, recognizing faces through sight. But maybe it's something deeper than that. Maybe it's recognizing faces regardless of how the information gets into the brain, whether it's seen faces, as it most always is, or even touch faces, which is rarely something we do for recognition purposes. But those of us that don't have prosopagnosia can do it. Those that do have prosopagnosia cannot, for some reason, which is really interesting. It suggests prosopagnosia is kind of a general face recognition problem, not one that's just limited to recognition through sight. What else? Well, inversion effects also occur with faces that are felt, right? So we talked a little bit about how disproportionately hard it is to recognize a face when it's inverted relative to other objects. We talked about that last class, right? So whether you're talking about dogs or pictures of houses, pictures of oh, I don't know, birds or something like that. When you invert those pictures, it is a little harder to recognize maybe what it is, but nowhere near as hard as it is to invert when you are inverting a face and asking who that person is that you're looking at. And the same thing seems to be the case with touch. So this is a little bit of a different methodology. People are asked to recognize faces, not through touching live faces now, live human faces, but touching masks, just to make it a little bit easier to present the stimuli over and over again. So these are just, I guess, plaster masks that are taken from people's real faces. And people are asked to, determine whether it's the same mask they're touching twice in a row, or is it two different masks? And they can do this, again, about 80% correctly, if they are feeling the masks presented upright. But once the masks are turned upside down, their performance goes way, way down. And on top of that, this inhibition of recognizing faces through touch when they are presented upside down does not occur for other objects, such as in this experiment was done with these clay teapots. And as you can see here, these clay teapots are, are different enough that, we would be able to touch them when they're upright and to determine whether they're different. And also, in this case, when they're inverted and determine when they're different. So that disproportionate effect of inversion on recognition for touch, again, seems to be special to faces, okay? Which is great because, this idea of a face module, the idea that there's a special component of the brain that uses kind of these special processes. When we say there's a functional specialization, that's what we're talking about. There's a special set of processes. Not only works through seeing faces, but also works from touching faces, which is another characteristic of modules, right? That we're taking in all this information, we're using these specialized processes for this information, for this category of information of perceptual objects. And those specialized processes apply to however the information gets in, whether it's through sight or through touch in this case. So that's very supportive of this idea of a module taking in all this information from all these different modalities that can be used for this purpose, and use those specialized processes that seem to be dedicated to face perception and not other objects. Okay. Finally, so maybe this is based on this same sort of holistic sort of analysis. That's what's been suggested, that this holistic analysis that we do with faces that makes our perception of faces so much more efficient, so much more accurate, that is defeated when the face is turned upside down, is also what occurs through face recognition through touch. Finally, the last thing I wanted to say about this is through brain imaging, it seems that when we touch faces, upright faces, through touch, we are activating the same part of the brain, okay? Again, I'm not one of these folks that cares that you're memorizing all these brain parts, but this idea of a particular part of the brain, an anatomical specialization for face perception, having to do with the fusiform gyrus area. That's something we discussed with regard to seeing faces, and if you see damage there, very often you see prosopagnosia. That part of the brain gets active when we touch faces, upright faces as well. So that specialized anatomy is not only involved in seeing faces, it could very well be involved with touching faces, which is very consistent with this modular idea. Okay, so quick summary: face specialization. Do we have evidence for this specialized part of the brain that uses specialized processes to make the processing of that information really effective, really efficient, because of its ecological relevance. And yeah, clearly we've laid out this evidence of ecological relevance of face perception, in terms of certain aspects of the universality of attractiveness and how important attractiveness is for mate selection and other aspects of things like professional success. I mean, again, don't get freaked out. There's a lot of other things that go into mate selection and professional success. If you don't look like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie, that's okay. But it does have a bearing on our behavior, whether we want it to or not. The same thing with expressions and how emotion is conveyed on a face. There's some universality with that too. And then talking about the functional and anatomical distinctiveness, there does seem to be some evidence for that in terms of not just the fusiform gyrus area having support of this anatomical distinctiveness, but what happens when we invert a face seems to be something idiosyncratic to faces potentially. The idea of this cognitive impenetrability, but where we can't see, we can't help but see faces and things that we know consciously are not faces. Our face process still seems to be activated, even though that's just a rock, that's just a car front, that's just a cheese sandwich. The brain processes faces even though we know we're not looking at faces, suggesting there's a certain degree of impenetrability that occurs with that sort of processing. And then finally, the idea that all relevant information that is useful for perceiving faces not only is used, but actually shows these idiosyncratic processing sorts of characteristics is also supportive of this idea that a face perception seems modular. Cool. So yeah, that's the end of that slide. It does seem from what we've discussed so far that there is this kind of specialization, modularity of face perception. Okay, we are now going to switch gears and go into hearing and go right into speech perception. We usually do talk a little bit more about hearing in discussion section and in lecture, but because of having to go a little slower in our quarantine class, this is just what we'll have to do. But it's kind of nice in that we are going to continue to talk about modularity and spatialization right away. So let's do that. We're going to continue to oh, okay, stops the sharing. Okay, so here I am back here. That's okay. I think, how are we doing? Yeah, actually, we're early. This is not a good time to take a break. Let's instead go right into speech perception. Then we'll take a break where we need it. Probably about 10, 15 minutes. Yeah, let's do that. So we are going to talk about speech perception. Now, I like talking about speech perception. Oops, hold on just a second. Oh, okay. I like talking about speech perception by kind of starting off with a very practical problem. So you are of the generation, I guess when you were little, there was already usable speech recognition on your phone, maybe? I'm trying to think. Maybe. Yeah, no, maybe my kids, I'm trying to think. So my older son is 20 now. And I guess Siri didn't become something on the iPhone until he was maybe 5 or 6. I remember them getting so excited about it. But probably as long as you can remember, there has been speech recognition. I can remember a lot of time when there was no speech recognition. So this issue of speech recognition devices was something I've tracked all my adult life. And that is because I work in the field. And when I was a graduate student, I worked in a laboratory that was very concerned with devising machines that could recognize speech. And I know the history of this. It was a ridiculously difficult thing to do. Okay. The idea first was to get a machine that could read text. This is what they were doing in my lab back in the 80s. A machine that could read text and then synthesize it for the blind, and then in turn recognize, commands that a blind individual or any individual would be able to give. And there were computers then, giant mainframe computers mostly, but the idea was, let's design a machine that can speak and recognize speech. And they started to be able to make some headway on getting, synthetic speech. You know how probably early synthetic speech sounded very weird. It was monotone. It was like the old movies you see where they depict robots and things like that. It didn't sound great, but it was recognizable. What they had a terrible time doing was getting computers to recognize speech. And they were making some progress with machines recognizing certain aspects of music and other sorts of sounds, explosions and things like that. They were having success with that, but boy, to get a machine to recognize speech was really, really difficult. I'll tell you, to get it to where it is now with Siri, it probably took about 80 years to where Siri is right now. And there were devices, there was software that could do it beforehand. There was things you could put on your laptop, your home computer that took training. Okay, so there was something called Dragon Speak or something like that. That was close to its name, about 20 years ago, but it didn't work great at all, and you had to train it with your own voice. There were also systems on the phone where, it would be like a, you know, interactive system where like you could ask for flight information and weather and things like that. But those systems worked with lots of different speakers, but there were very few words you could use. Siri now, and you know how Siri works probably. I don't know if you folks use Siri very much. I use it all the time. A lot of people my age use it all the time because we're not comfortable doing our text messages with our thumbs. We prefer to actually speak into our phones. I know my wife and I do that. So we're very familiar with what Siri is good at and not good at now. And you probably know that Siri is far from perfect. When Siri first came out, back when you guys were kids, it was funny because kids were the ones that really wanted to play with it because they thought it was fun to be able to talk to the phone. And it was notoriously bad with kids' voices. When Siri first came out, it was much better with men's voices than it was women's voices, and it was terrible with kids' voices. And the kids used to try to, see what funny things Siri would interpret what they were saying. That they thought it was a fun game. But even now, you probably know Siri is far from perfect. Siri does not do well in the car, right? When I try to dictate a message to text in the car because of all the background sound, it does not do well. It makes these, there's websites dedicated to all the mistakes that Siri and other speech recognition systems make, and they can be, kind of charming. Siri, I'm bleeding bad. Can you call me an ambulance? Siri answers, from now on, I'll call you an ambulance. Okay. Things like this. How is our little daughter? Our pregnant little daughter? Mom, how did you know? I meant perfect little daughter. I mean, these are just the kind of characteristic mistakes that Siri will still make. Human speech perception, even, the second language speech recognition is so much better still than Siri. Siri works, well, Siri's vocabulary is now pretty good. But new words it has trouble with, proper words of proper nouns and all that sort of stuff it has trouble with. And it has a lot of trouble with speakers that have foreign accents, speakers that speak quickly, speakers that have any impediments, and it's still not great with kids. It's better than it was say 15 years ago, 10 years ago, but it's still not great. And the question is why? You know, a movie in the 1960s came out called 2001: A Space Odyssey. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a pretty cool movie. I think it holds up very well, even though it was done, what, 69, I think it came out. And there's a scene from the movie, and if you know anything about it, it was projecting what life would be like in 2001. And, you know, often as these films go, they projected things being a lot further along than they actually were in 2001. This is, you know, a scene where the astronauts are making a trip to Jupiter to, you know, investigate something. And there's a pivotal scene in the movie where the onboard computer, which is, you know, very interactive and such an important part of the film, an important part of their mission, has no trouble understanding auditory speech, but they're starting to get a little suspicious of it. So they go into a little area where that's soundproof, thinking that the computer can't understand, won't be able to understand them because it's soundproof. But not only can the computer understand their auditory speech, it can lip read them, and that's what this is showing here. So we really thought by the year 2001 that, you know, computers would have no problem understanding speech, and that was projected from the 60s. But oh my gosh, they still had terrible problems, and they still are not great. And the question is why? Why has it been so difficult to design a speech recognizing computer? And the answer actually provides some really interesting answers about how the brain is able to perceive speech, and issues having to do, again, with modularity. So it's a nice way of connecting to what we just discussed. And these issues really have to do with pattern recognition. Remember, this is a term we used before, pattern recognition, way back in the beginning of the quarter when we were discussing the computational approach. We talked about getting a computer to recognize you know, a pattern such as a letter, such as text, such as the letter R. Remember this? We talked about, you know, it going through and looking for features and then trying to see how those features fit together, whether we were talking about vertical lines and semicircles, slanted lines. And, you know, that's how you would get a computer system to recognize text, whether it was the system that was in the post office or the system that was reading the numbers along the bottom of checks, right? You know, the checks you write at the bank. You know, this is an issue of pattern recognition. And we're talking still about pattern recognition when we're talking about speech perception and getting computers to recognize speech. But here, the pattern is not, you know, something that can be seen. It's a pattern that can be heard. So this is now patterns in sound that we would get the computer to try to recognize. So we're now kind of shifting our problem of pattern recognition into sound. And to do that, we'll have to identify things like what the units of speech are and what the cues of those units might be like, right? So if we're talking about text, we're talking about up here, getting a computer to read the text, speech perception, right? We'd have to get it to recognize letters, and to get it to recognize letters, we have to get it to recognize these features of letters, right? The little curves, the little vertical lines. And then whether, you know, we apply something like a connectionist sort of system to it, or, you know, kind of more of you know, the computational one where it's doing the features one at a time and trying to understand these, same deal. Okay, but now we're just transferring that problem to sound. So let's do that. Let's try to imagine how we might design a computer to recognize speech through the sounds of speech. Okay, what are the units? What are the units of speech? Instead of letters, what are we going to have the speech recognition computer use? And the answer is phonemes. And what is a phoneme? These are basically like the letters of speech sounds, okay? And you'll see that we can kind of think of them as letters at first, but you'll see there's a lot of slippage. They don't completely correspond to letters for some important reasons. So we're going to say phonemes are like the letters of the sounds of speech. Okay, the basic units, the things that we're going to want our computer to identify. Right, rather than the written letters, we want it to go into the sound and find these units. Okay, find these basic units, but they're going to be in sound, so they're going to be called phonemes. Right, and one way we can identify what a phoneme is let's think now. We can. This is going to correspond to letters, but let's think about it in sounds. Well, when you make the sound cat, okay, that's a word. We call that a word. But how many individual sounds go into producing the word cat? Okay, cat. Be doing a lot of silly stuff today. Cat. I would say that's probably 3 different sounds, right? Cat. In this case, I think that's not a bad analysis. Cat, right? In fact, what we can do is to kind of test that out is we can take the word cat and see if we can substitute in different speech sounds for each of those individual 3 sounds, right? So we can go, I'm going to replace now the ka with a f, and now I have at. I have 3 sounds, and it's now a different word, right? Or I can replace the middle sound, and I can go from cat to cot, ka-a-t, okay? And so what I'm doing here is I'm replacing the phonemes and coming up with different words. And if I can do that, that's not a bad way of establishing that I've got 3 different phonemes in the spoken word cat, right? Happens to also be the number of letters I have, but as you'll see, that's not always going to correspond. But yeah, I think we have 3 different phonemes in the word cat, ka-at, and in the word fat, fat, and the word cot as well, okay, and on and on. So as on a first pass, we can think that, yeah, all right, we can think of these things kind of as the letters of spoken speech and of heard speech. However, you know how English works, right? How the spelling rules work. There's going to be a lack of correspondence in certain cases, right? So, for example, how many letters do we have in the word phoneme? Okay, we'll count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 letters in the word phoneme. But now let's say that word to ourselves and see how many speech sounds we have in the word phoneme. Okay, so now just ignore the spelling completely and say phoneme to yourself. And as your mouth makes different sorts of shapes and your voice makes different sorts of sounds, how many different speech sounds, how many different phonemes do we have in the word phoneme? F-O-N-E-M. F-O-N-E-M. I get 5. I think that's 5. Yeah, 5. 5 phonemes. Okay, well, you know what's going on, right? There's this kind of weird spelling rule that we have, for example, in English, that sometimes PH stands for F. So right there, we have a lack of correspondence to the number of letters and the number of phonemes, right? For the Latin root of phoneme, we use PH to stand for F, or stand for the F sound. And so there we have 2 letters for 1 phoneme. And it goes the other way as well. We can have this letter here, which actually isn't pronounced at all, this last D. It just changes the nature of how we pronounce this first D in here, right? And so it's, these crazy spelling rules in English. There's going to be this, not complete correspondence to, the letters and the phonemes. So yeah, for example, PH can be the same thing as the letter F, and that, oh, by the way, these are often how phonemes are represented. If you see a letter or a symbol with these slashes, that's kind of referring to the sounds of speech, not letters. Okay, very simple. And a single letter can actually stand for more than one sound, right? So the letter, the letter E, as we write it, can represent the E sound as it would be used in the word phoneme, or it can represent the sound as it would in the word egg. Okay. So you learned this in elementary school, right? Letters don't completely correspond to speech sounds, especially in English. Other languages are better. Spanish is much better about how the letters and the phonemes correspond. English is pain. English is hard to learn for this reason. In fact, in English, we have 26 letters of the alphabet, but we have at least 45 different phonemes in English. And actually, these probably should have slashes around them. We just didn't include it in this slide because it would be a little distracting. But these are different sorts of symbols and groups of letters that stand for different phonemes. For example, what is this, a theta? That's how, if you were a linguist, you'd write the sound for th as in thin. You don't need to memorize this or anything like that. I just wanted to show you that, letters will give you kind of an intuitive sense of what the units are of spoken language. But in English, you already see there's a lot of slippage between the letters and their or the phonemes and their corresponding letters, right? It's not a one-to-one mapping. But thinking of phonemes as the units of spoken sound, that's good. We can now, as we are engineers today, trying to design a computer system that can recognize spoken speech, we can tell our computers, okay, computer, you're going to look for phonemes. You're going to try to identify phonemes in order to recognize what people are saying. Okay, those are the units you're going to look for. Cool. The next step, of course, is to look to see what the features are for each of the phonemes, right? We'll do that in a second, but let's first take our little break and do our quiz question here, because this is a nice time to take a break. Looks like there's a couple of questions here in chat. This is fun. Yeah, Melinda says, Siri, Alexa, have a hard time with my heavy Eastern European accent. Is hilarious. My conversation with Siri is very funny. I'm sure. I think it's a very common thing. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, Back to the Future. We thought we'd have hoverboards and flying cars and all that sort of stuff. Yep, that's very common. Other things maybe. What computers can do in some ways, maybe the internet and all that sort of stuff is not necessarily something Back to the Future anticipated, but yeah, I'm still waiting for my flying car. When I was a kid, we had this cartoon called The Jetsons, and they had the coolest flying cars in the world, and we're not even close with that. Yeah, Jenna guessed 5 phonemes. Absolutely correct. Thank you. Yeah, okay. So Talia asked about this hearing space lecture. There might be a chance that I'll be able to get to the hearing space lecture at the very end. It breaks my heart because, boy, that's really interesting stuff. But yeah, no, you will not be responsible for anything I am not covering in lecture unless I run out of time to cover a slide in what I'm planning on covering. But I think for the most part, you will not be responsible for any slides that I will not be covering in lecture. Let's just assume that's the case. Okay, cool. Let's do our polling question. Oops. I got a little hitch there in the signal. I guess it's okay now. Okay, let's do our polling question. And this is just right from the face perception lecture we just had, that last slide, faces by touch. The question is, perceiving faces from both vision and touch supports which characteristic of modules? Okay, so there's a specific characteristic of modules that face perception from touch supports. Is it A, cognitive impenetrability? B, all relevant information is available? Oh, I wrote availability. All information is available, it should say. C, no conscious access to the process, or D, none of the above. Okay, go ahead and answer this one. And again, the answer B should read all relevant information is available, not all information is availability. And we'll talk about the answer. Yeah, good. No, this one's stumping a few people, and I'm glad it is. That will allow us to talk about the answer. I'll give you another 10 seconds. All right. The majority of folks did get this. The correct answer is B. Now, I think what's confusing people is that all of these, A, B, and C, are characteristics of modules. Okay, cognitive impenetrability is one, no conscious access to the process is another, right? All relevant information is available, of course, is one. However, the characteristic that using touch for face perception supports is that second one, that all relevant information is available. Okay. It doesn't really support cognitive impenetrability or the conscious access to the process. What it supports is the fact that you can perceive faces from more than one modality, whether that modality is seeing or hearing, sensory modality I'm talking about here, which means that the face module wants to take in as much information and can take in this information from seeing or touching faces and then processes it the same way, more or less. Okay, so the correct answer here is it's most supportive of all relevant information available. Even though all of them are supportive of modularity, it's asking which characteristic of modularity touch of faces is supporting, and the answer is B. All right, so that's your answer to that question. Cool. Any other questions before we go back to our slides? Great, okay. Let's go back then. So just to remind you, the big question here is we are trying to understand, oops, oh, sorry about this. There we go. We are trying to understand something about speech perception. Let me go back here, sorry. In general, and as you'll see, modularity also in general. But from a very practical standpoint, we want to know why it's been so difficult to design speech recognizing machines. So it's an engineering question today. Why has it taken so long to design Siri, right? Much longer than it's taken to design other recognition devices. Is there something special about speech that's making it so difficult? And so we've taken this practical problem. We've already established that what we'll need to do is get our speech recognition device to recognize phonemes, which we've identified as kind of the basic units of spoken language. And the next step was to go in and to teach our computer how to identify phonemes by identifying the features of phonemes, right? We talked about identifying letters by identifying the features of letters, right? Vertical lines, horizontal lines, curves, intersections between these things, right? Way back then. And now we're hoping we can do the same thing for spoken language, spoken speech, by teaching it to look for features in the sounds. So let's look at the features of phonemes. Yeah, there. Well, wasn't that clever of me? Here's the slide that I've been referring to. You know, we talked about a feature pattern recognition, and we could do a feature analysis looking for the individual features with letters. Let's do the same thing for sound now. So what are the features for phonemes? And here we're going to have to get just a tiny bit technical with regard to the acoustics, with regard to sound. And I know you did have an introduction to sound in your discussion section, so that should help a little bit. I'm going to show you a kind of a chart of sound, a display of sound. And that's it right there. Now I'll take my time here and explain it in some detail so you understand what's being represented. Let's just look at this very top image right here. What this image is showing you is kind of a graphic display of the speech syllables, groups of syllables, pa and ba. Okay, easy. There it is, written right there. Pa, ba. So there may be little pieces of words or something like that. You know, we call these bisyllables because it's pa is 2 syllables and ba is 2 syllables. Cool. The other thing I can tell you right off the bat is this dimension down here is time, right? So it's pa, ba, right? So this is just time down here, and this to give you a sense is how long it would take. So it would maybe take 2 seconds to say pa and 2 seconds to say ba. And, you know, I didn't fill in the details here, but this is, I don't know, maybe 5 seconds down here altogether, just to give you a rough idea. Pa, ba. Is that about 5 seconds, 4 seconds or so? But that's it down there. So this dimension is time. Cool. Now, what's this dimension here? This dimension here, as it's labeled along the side, is frequency. Remember frequency from your discussion section, right? Frequency is like, you know, pitch. It corresponds roughly to pitch. High frequencies are up here. Low frequencies are down here, right? Oh, I always have a little guitar handy, right? This is a high frequency. This is a low frequency, right? Going up in frequency would be, right? Right? Going up in frequency. So these are the high frequencies up here, but these are actually much higher than that instrument can play. And these are the low frequencies down here. And they're actually lower than the low frequencies on that little guitarish thing anyway. But that gives you a sense what that is, though. Okay. Now, what this means is that these marks here are telling you where the energy is in terms of the frequency dimension across time. Okay, that's all this is telling you, is where the energy is. And one more thing, there's one more dimension that's depicted on here, and that is intensity, or the amount of energy. And you learned in discussion section that things that are loud have a lot of energy, and things that are quiet have less energy. So this portion of the signal would probably have less energy, and if we were to take it out and just listen to it, would be quieter than this portion, which is darker. So the darker the smudges on these graphs here, the louder, the more energy there is. Okay, so this is how speech sounds are depicted in this graph across time, across frequency, and how much energy there is at that position in frequency, or at that pitch in frequency. Okay, so these are speech signals, and as you look at this here, you'll say, it's kind of like a pattern of smudges. Okay, a pattern of smudges. And this pattern of smudges is really what's going to be the critical features of phonemes. So we got there, right? I told you we were going to try to find the features in the signal, in the acoustic signal, that we could teach our computer to look for to identify the features of phonemes. And I'm telling now the computer, look for the smudges. Okay, look for smudges and patterns in those smudges. And those patterns in the smudges, let's move down here. Actually, this is my favorite. You can see this one here. This is a really nice one. See down here for ada, ada. Hopefully you're seeing where I'm pointing. There's a smudge that kind of goes down here and another smudge that goes up here. Those are great features for the computer to learn. Computer, if you want to be able to recognize spoken speech, go ahead and plot out the energy that exists across the frequency and across time, and look for a smudge that goes down, a descending smudge, and look for another smudge that goes up, and an ascending smudge. And when you see those two smudges, you might know that you're seeing a da syllable or a duh sound. Okay, you getting the idea here? I'm just trying to make this as intuitive as possible. But what we're basically doing is we're having our computer look for the pattern. Uh-oh, did I freeze? If I froze, I apologize. Okay. But we're having our computer look for the pattern of these bars of energy. Basically, it's looking for these kind of concentrations of energy, these bars of energy, right? There's maybe one here, there's one here. You seeing these kind of bars of energy here that I'm kind of highlighting with my pointer? These are the features of phonemes. We call these thick concentrations of energy in the frequency spectrum, we call these formants. So there's a new word for you. Formants are, in fact, the features, hopefully the features of phonemes. And they're like concentrations of energy in the signal, in the sound signal. Okay, sometimes the concentrations are here, sometimes they're there. It's like looking for the lines that make up letters, the lines and curves that make up letters. Computer, look for formants, and that can help. All right, so that's what they used to think back in that old lab I was working at back in the 80s, that let's get our computer to look for formants. Okay, they were able to plot things out like this beautifully. It took a long time back then to plot these things out. But it worked. And they said, let's get our computer to learn formants, and we can get it to learn phonemes. Okay. But here's the problem. Okay. Here's the problem with formants. They are very, very malleable, meaning they're very kind of fragile. And what I mean by that is formants are going to change with vocal tract shape. You'll see. Before we get to that, I'm kind of laying the groundwork for what the problem is going to be. But, before I get to that, let's just establish what some of these things look like. All right. So I forgot I had to show you this too. What I'm going to do, these are hard to read, at least for the purposes of the class. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you a cartoon version of what formants look like. There we go. So here they are. Down here, remember, here's da here. And remember I said for da, there's one that's descending and one that's ascending. I'm just trying to make it easier to see by showing you now this kind of cartoonized, caricaturized version of formants. All right. So I'm just making these smudge things easier to read for you in the class. So this is what da looks like. And this is what potentially ba looks like. And so in theory, what we could do is say, computer, when you see a descending formant kind of piece here and an ascending formant here, that's how you can know it's da. On the other hand, if you see an ascending formant here and then another upward ramp here, that's a ba. And we can go further and say, okay, now you see the same thing as da, but now you see a more dramatically descending formant piece here. That's a ga. So you can understand what we could do is go ahead and teach the computer to recognize all these different like little formant ramps here, all these ascending, descending little slopes here, and get it to recognize potentially different consonant phonemes. Okay, so it distinguishes da versus ba versus ga. By the way, I guess this is another term I do want you to know. When we're talking about these little ramps here, these little descending and ascending, they're given names. They're given the name of transition. They're just called formant transitions. They are just the little ramps here that are potentially going to allow us to distinguish consonant phonemes from each other, right? There's an ascending formant transition, upwardly going formant transition. Here's a descending formant transition. We're just giving names to these little slopes, Okay, formant transitions, cool. But here's the problem. As we try to identify features for phonemes, we run into problems, right? So let's see. Let's do it this way. All right. Say we're trying to teach our computer to recognize the duh, recognize a duh phoneme, okay? We could say, all right, look for an ascending and a descending formant transition. And when you see that, you'll recognize duh, right? And in fact, it works kind of, not only in the context of da, but in the context of do. We can go ahead and say, look for that descending formant transition and that ascending formant transition. And it could recognize duh in the context of do, the word do, or the syllable do, okay? However, and here's the problem, here's the first time we're going to see the problem that's caused 70 years of struggle in designing computers to recognize speech. That formant transition that we're teaching the computer to look for to identify duh sounds is not going to work if the duh sound is spoken in the context of an E vowel. This is what that transition, that critical transition looks like if there's an E vowel following the duh. In other words, we've already found a problem where the computer is going to not be able to identify this as a duh sound if it's followed by an E vowel. So what we find here is, in fact, the formants change with context. The critical formants, the critical, maybe to be more precise here, the critical formant transitions change with the vowel context, okay? This is what the critical formant transition is for duh in the context of an A vowel. It helps distinguish duh from buh, okay? In fact, it works here for do as well, that descending formant transition. But if you put it into the context of a vowel E, as in D, right, it's not going to work. So already our computer's going, uh-oh, I'm having trouble recognizing duh sounds because it's in the context of another sort of vowel, okay? Why would that be the case? Why do the formant transitions change with the vowel context? Okay, I'll answer that just a second, but let's take a step back here. Let's think back to what we're trying to get our computer to do. It's the same thing we tried to get it to do when we had it recognizing text or recognizing numbers for zip codes on an envelope or something like that. We had to go through the letters one by one and try to recognize features. And we got it to do it. It was not that difficult a thing for it to do. It does a pretty good job these days to recognize these sorts of things, right? And notice something else. It could do so by looking at the letters individually. But for phonemes, it seems that what phoneme follows the one you're trying to identify, the vowel that follows the consonant you're trying to identify, seems to affect the features. Let's think about why this might occur now. Let's think about how speech is produced. Let's think about how speech is produced. I'm going to have you do this silently to yourself. I wish you were in a live lecture hall with me so I could watch you do it, because you'll look silly and I enjoy you looking silly. You can produce D versus do to yourself. And what I'd like you to do is just, you don't even have to say it out loud, just go D, do, D, do. And now what I'd like you to do is not follow through with the vowel. Just start saying a duh sound for the syllable D, and then the duh sound for the syllable do. Okay, I'll do it for you. I'll be the goofy one. So I'll go D for D and D for do. And so even though I stopped before I actually went into voicing the vowel, okay, D, D, My lips had already started forming, so I was anticipating the vowel. And the fact that my lips were forming before the vowel was produced affects the acoustic structure of duh. So I go d, d. My lips are already forming the vowel before the vowel's actually produced. Okay. And what that means is that the vowel I'm going to produce is actually going to affect the phonemes for the previous consonant. Okay, I'm sorry, it's going to affect the formants and their transitions for the previous phoneme. Why would that be? Well, let's step back again and think about spelling. Here's a sentence. My cat is fat. Okay. Which I don't have cats anymore, but most of my cats have been fat. It's easy to, especially if they're indoor cats, you have to be very careful. My cat is fat. Okay, let's spell this. M-Y-C-A-T-I-S-F-A-T. M-Y-C-A-T-I-S-F-A-T. That's as fast as I can spell it. I'm a pretty fast speller. But that's nowhere as fast as I can say my cat is fat. My cat is fat. Okay, it's 10 phonemes in there. My cat is fat. That's really fast. That's less than half a second probably. But if I spell it, M-Y-C-A-T-I-S-F-A-T, what spelling is like is saying one phoneme at a time. M-Y-C-A-T-I-S-F-A-T. Why is it that I can say my cat is fat so much faster than I can spell my cat is fat? I can say my cat is fat really very quickly. I mean, on average, people say 10 to 15 phonemes per second, but they can't spell nearly as fast. Right? They can't spell nearly as fast. And spelling, what it's like, as I said, it's like when you spell my cat is fat, M-Y-C-A-T-I-S-F-A-T, it's like saying a phoneme one at a time. So what allows me to say more, what allows me to say my cat is fat faster than spelling? And it is the case that we produce phonemes more than one at a time. D and do is a perfect example. Okay, when I had you do d, do, it's a demonstration that your mouth, your entire speech production mechanism, is producing phonemes more than one at a time. It overlaps the phonemes. So it's not going M-Y-S-A-T-I-S-F-A-T. It's going my cat is fat and is overlapping. Okay, it is overlapping the phonemes. When we produce duh for D versus do, we're already starting to say what the vowel is. Right? I'm trying to stop myself from going into the vowel, da, do, but my lips can't help it. They're already starting to form for the vowel. We produce phonemes more than one at a time. That's the lesson here. We produce the phonemes more than one at a time. And what that does is it messes up the speech signal severely. This is called co-articulation. That's just saying that we're producing phonemes more than one at a time. We're co-articulating phonemes. As we're saying duh, we're also saying e. We're also saying oo. We are co-articulating phonemes. We're overlapping the phonemes significantly, which is very different from how we see letters, right? These letters, yeah, they're a specific font, that are a little unique, right? Maybe we haven't seen this font before, although I imagine we have, right? But one thing that's very true here is that these letters are not overlapping, right? They are isolated. Yeah, they're close, but for a computer that's recognizing letters on a page, it's not that hard because it can see these things one at a time and look for the features of each letter one at a time. For speech, the phonemes are not distinct like they are for letters on a page. The phonemes overlap, so the features overlap. And what that means is that the features are going to change with context. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. You're seeing what distinguishes da from ba and ga in the context of an E vowel is a different feature from what distinguishes da from ba and ga in the context of ah and u for that matter. The features are changing with the context of what phoneme comes after and before the phoneme that we're trying to identify. And it means that there are no clear distinctive features for speech. Unlike there is for text on a page, there seem to be no clear distinctive features. We can't tell our computer, look for a descending feature a descending form and transition, a descending form and transition feature to find a duh, because it won't find this stuff if we do that. And the reason for that is why it's so hard to get a computer to recognize speech is because of this overlap. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. It's like, oh, well, maybe the nice analogy for text would be cursive writing. When we write in cursive, we write with letters that kind of influence each other, right? The tail of one letter goes into the tail, the beginning tail, the front tail of the next letter, right? There's a little bit of an influence, and I'm saying, no, it's much worse than that. You can get a text reading machine to recognize cursive fairly well, because there still is enough of a distance, enough of an isolation between the letters. What it's like, if you want to make an analogy, it would be like trying to get a text reading, a letter reading machine from a page, looking at cursive, and then but taking those cursive letters and having them overlap with each other. And now saying, okay, computer, try to find those features. Try to find those slanted lines and those vertical lines and all that sort of stuff with cursive letters overlapping. And I have no idea what to do, says the text reading computer. And that's exactly what we're dealing with when it comes to trying to design a computer to recognize spoken speech. The features are completely overlapping with each other. The features change with context. There really aren't any consistent distinctive features for spoken speech. Okay, that's why it's so hard. I have a couple of questions here, I guess, in chat. Let's see. Sarah S. Is that why it's so hard for people to understand others speaking their native language, but really fast? Oh, it's a really good question. Yeah, it could be related, but this problem exists just for all language. Even when we're listening to our native language, it is this overlapping of distinctive features. But yeah, it could be one of the reasons it's harder to recognize a language that you're trying to learn if it's spoken fast. That potentially, especially when there's features in the language that are not in our native language. Yeah, it could be related. It's a good question, Sarah. Okay, so great. Let's now kind of move away from this kind of practical question and understand, try to understand something about how we're able to, how humans. So yeah, here's the problem. This is why it's so difficult to design a machine that can recognize speech, why it's taken so long, and why even now it's still a problem, why speech recognition devices aren't better. We are so much better at getting machines to recognize text. We are so much better. I mean, machines can recognize very subtle sounds now with regard to recognizing musical instruments, with regard to recognizing the sounds of space, right? There's antenna that can bring in subtle aspects of what goes on out in the cosmos and recognize sounds, microscopic sounds. I mean, we're pretty good at getting designing machines that can recognize things that aren't speech sounds, but we're able to do it. And yeah, it's true, we're not able to recognize foreign accented speech or our second language speech as well. But boy, our native language, we are really good at. We're able to recognize, for the most part, somebody we've never met before. We can recognize them right away. We can recognize them if they're speaking quickly. We can recognize them if they're speaking with the background sound of car engines and all that sort of stuff. That's so hard for Siri to do. So what is it that allows our brains to recognize speech despite the mess of critical features? Okay. Which brings us back to the possibility that we might have specialized mechanisms in the brain for speech perception. So back to this issue. Is speech perception special like we think, at least on a first pass, face perception might be special? And we know this, we're coming right from that lecture, the modularity lecture, where we talked about there might be a specialization in the brain for some sorts of functions. And we talked about the characteristics of the module. It would seem like just as for face perception, if there's going to be a module for sounds, right, for some type of sound, speech perception would be a great candidate, right? It seems so important to our survival, right? We have to be able to understand whether the people are saying, whether the people intend towards us. You know, by some arguments, at least, language is what separates us from other species, you know, with some controversy, but still, you know, no other animals seem to have the sophistication in language that we have, right? You know, it has this evolutionary importance. It is universal. Which I'm sure you've learned that all cultures, even if they don't have a written language, they do have a spoken language, right? So we all can use speech. So yes, that kind of evolutionary universality, which we were talking about with faces, seems to be there. What else? Oh, you know, you'll like this. This is a fun example. So remember, we were talking about hearing. I'm sorry, talking about seeing faces and things we knew were not faces. There is a really fun analogy in spoken language called sine wave speech. I think you'll enjoy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a sound that you'll know isn't speech, but you might be able to hear something in there. I hope it's not too loud for you.
Where were you a year ago? Where were you a year ago? Where were you a year ago?
Okay. Hopefully you're able to hear that okay. And you knew it wasn't a person speaking, right? It sounded kind of like R2-D2 maybe. Sounded like whistles. In fact, it is just whistles. It's for those of you that are interested in the acoustics, it's just 3 whistles that are kind of changing. That's what you're seeing here. 3 whistles that are changing in kind of interesting ways. But it's certainly not speech, but you're hearing speech in it, even though consciously you know that it's not speech. Want to hear some more? They're kind of fun. Here, let me move this. Shoot. I'm trying to move my little bar here. Sorry. My gosh. How do I move this? There we go. Okay. All right, here's another example. Hopefully you can see everything. Hold on a second. Okay, here's more. See if you can understand this sentence. It's a little trickier.
Please say what this word is. Please say what this word is. Please say what this word is.
So do you understand that sentence? The sentence is, please say what this word is. And then there's one more for you. This one's a more difficult sentence. It's a little odd, I think. But I think you'll be able to understand it.
My dog Bingo ran around the wall. My dog Bingo ran around the wall. My dog Bingo ran around the wall.
It's my dog Bingo ran around the wall. Okay. So this is sine wave speech, right? And really, there's a lot of uses for it. There's a lot of reasons that we'll talk about later. But I think for now, it's a really nice example of, you know, kind of this cognitive impenetrability, where even though you know that you're not hearing speech sounds, right? You can't help but hear a speech. You can't help but see your speech information in there. And I just think it's a great kind of sound analogy to seeing faces and rocks and faces and cars and faces and mountains and sandwiches and stuff like that. It's just a great example of how the processes of speech perception, auditory speech perception, aren't penetrable by our outside knowledge that we're not hearing a speech signal, right? It's a great example of that. It's kind of fun. All right, what else? Yes, we know that, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a couple of minutes, but we have a predisposition for speech perception, that we are able to distinguish speech sounds as early as we can be tested. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the details of that and how that is tested in the infant laboratory in a little bit. So the idea of a predisposition is also consistent with modularity. Oh, of course, aphasias, which I'm sure you learned about in your intro psychology classes. So individuals that have some sort of brain injury through stroke or some other type of accident, where everything seems to be working okay, but they have a language deficit of some type or another. Either they have trouble producing language or understanding language, suggesting maybe there is some sort of specialization in the brain, and that anatomical specialization gets injured in that case. And of course, there's been imaging research that's consistent with the idea that there might be a special part of the brain that we use to perceive speech. But what we're going to end up talking mostly about, is the functional distinctiveness. Is there something functionally different about the perception of speech relative to other sounds? And that's what we're going to spend most of the next lecture talking about. As we discussed with faces, that faces seem to be disproportionately harder to perceive when they're inverted. And that might be because we're using specialized processes having to do with holistic information. Is there something like that for speech perception? Does speech perception seem to be processed with a different set of processes that aren't used for other types of sounds? And so we will be talking about that possibility next class. But we'll take our break now and do our polling question and then end class. My dog Bingo ran around the wall. People got all these right. Please say what this word is. Good. I'm glad everybody could hear it. Terrific. Good. So let's do our polling question and then we'll end class. And we just went through this, so I think you'll find it very simple. The intense bands of energy observable in a speech spectrogram. Oh boy. So those plots that I showed you with all the smudges, they are speech spectrograms. I guess I didn't actually use that term when I introduced it. So those smudges the graphs that showed you those smudges, where I was pointing out the various things, had intense bands of energy. I said that's where there's a lot of energy right there. We called those something. We gave them a name. Is it A, formants, B, phonemes, C, categories, or D, co-articulations? It's a little bit of a technical question, but that's okay. I think you'll know the answer. All right, I think I probably should end there to make sure we all get the answer. The correct answer, which most of you, well, majority got, is in fact A. It is formants. The intense bands of energy are formants. Okay, they're the things that have the little ramps on them. Those are called formant transitions, but those intense bands of energy are called formants. Now, you might be able to find phonemes, but because of the kind of mess in spectrograms, it's very hard to find phonemes, and that's why it's been so hard to get our machines to recognize phonemes by having to do the analysis. So when we're talking about those bands of energy, the correct answer is A, formants, not phonemes, categories, or co-articulations. Okay, there is your answer. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody, and I'll see you a week from today. Bye-bye.